I'm not entirely sure where to begin with this. I have so many things I want to say, yet at the same time, nothing at all. Abominable is the latest DreamWorks Animation film to hit the big screen, and considering the last one released way back in February for the company, I was somewhat excited to see it. I remember seeing briefly the trailer for it earlier in the summer sometime, but beyond that, I was going into this film entirely blind. Judging simply enough from the clips you're seeing in front of you right now, as well as just the title, you can figure out what the film is about. A stray Yeti adventure. You know how it is. And the reviews look good. Rotten Tomatoes currently gives it an 81%, with people saying it's a good-hearted and nice, wholesome experience. And yeah, this film looks fantastic. Any frame of this animation could make for a great wallpaper or poster scenery. Some of the themes are nice to see unfold once again, and though people do find it unoriginal, they agree that it is nice to watch nonetheless. But as I sat in the middle of the cinema screening, surrounded by more families and children, feeling a tad uncomfortable as I always do at these kid-friendly events, I slowly came to the realization that I just don't like this film. I really don't like this film. I've become the equivalent of the old man who shouts at clouds, because I feel that this film is yet another step back for the film industry, and somehow it just really grinds my gears. The last film DreamWorks made was How to Train Your Dragon 3. How is this the follow-up to it? Well, actually, okay, there is a bit of an explanation as to what's going on behind the scenes here. For a start, as is probably the most obvious point here, I'm not the target demographic for a film like this. It may be an animated movie, which doesn't necessarily have to be made for kids, but it's quite clearly true that this film is made for kids, and pretty young ones at that, I think. Thankfully, there's no fart jokes and certainly no flossing, but even still, this film is pretty basic. And maybe that's because I'm way too old for this film, and so I have too much experience with how film storylines tend to go, but I seriously cannot think of a single original element of this movie. Only really the creative forms of Deus Ex Machina magic to get the protagonists over a hurdle. Every character archetype is the same, every parent disagreement hiding away some magical creature is there, and the villains are another corporation or a hunter. The theming is pretty much the same, the scenarios are predictable, the payoff exactly as you'd expect it, and even the jokes are the exact same dialogue pieces you've heard a million times before in other movies.
I've got blueberries in places where blueberries should never be.
It was to the point where I was literally sat in the cinema thinking to myself, didn't AI write this? Is this the outcome of a machine perfectly creating every beat of story tropes to create an efficient movie product specifically designed to hit the emotional sensitivity of young children and basic parents? Am I watching the theatrical equivalent of plastic cheese here? Never before have I actually watched something that felt so produced and fake. It was literally neurological manipulation. You know, how modern day trailers are literally designed to hit at you psychologically. And while maybe, yes, I haven't actually confirmed that that isn't the case, there is a bit more of a potential reasoning behind why all of this is going on, and that is that this film was co-produced by the core DreamWorks Animation team as well as Pearl Studio. Now, Pearl Studio is a relatively new department of DreamWorks and was formerly known as Oriental DreamWorks. They don't have a large filmography due to their freshness in the industry, but they did additional production work on the likes of How to Train Your Dragon 2 and Penguins of Madagascar, but more importantly, they also co-produced Kung Fu Panda 3. And you know what Kung Fu Panda 3 and Abominable have in common? China. This is a Chinese-American joint venture. DreamWorks wanted to get into that juicy Chinese market and that additional 1 billion people to produce for, and all they needed to do was establish a successful business agreement. And what is now known as Pearl Studios is exactly that, becoming the first company in 20 to 30 years to get a license to import Western films into China, starting with The Croods in 2013. Now, Kung Fu Panda was a long-established project by the time Pearl Studios was created, and they simply assisted with the production by the end of its trilogy. But Abominable is their first original film that they've been able to work on. Still collaborated with the DreamWorks Animation team, but fully theirs to kind of realize. And so because of that, and the fact that this is absolutely supposed to be getting into China, the film plays out very, very safely. Now, I know just mentioning China can bring up all sorts of extra controversies that absolutely shouldn't be ignored, but looking at just Abominable as a film, there really isn't anything too politically toxic to see, considering it's a film catering to China. The entire premise takes place solely in China. The characters are entirely Chinese, and the villains are just bog standard, but not Chinese. Sure, they're a little militant and kinda corporation-y, but that's just standard villain stuff, and if anything, anti-China. The government is never mentioned, they're not idolized, and this is simply an adventure across China to see all the natural beauties of the land, and teaching many of the basic themes of family and nature, which isn't too unlike general Chinese culture anyway, but can still be innocent enough and simply reflects the niceties of life in China. And going off of the logic that this film is manufactured quite a lot to that Chinese release, it also kinda makes sense that this film is as formulaic as it is. While I'm certainly not the demographic for my age and experience, the fact of the matter is that many of these tropes which are tired on me may be new, not just to young children who come to see this film, but also many Chinese children who are less familiar with Western cinema. To them, every predictable twist, turn and joke to me is entirely original, and without all the extra context is probably pretty good too. The world of Abominable is beautiful. The animation team really outdid themselves, as does pretty much any modern day animation team does these days. The city of Shanghai looks both visually stunning yet overwhelmingly caging. The vast natural lands of the film look inviting, and the way that they're all turned up and flipped on their heads makes for a stunning experience. But beyond the visual design, I really find nothing that stands out when I personally watch this film. If we want to be nitpicky, I guess you could praise it for having a female lead, but to me, even pointing it out seems contrived, as this shouldn't be a topic of discussion anymore. It's normal, and certainly not as uncommon as it used to be, thankfully. The three main characters are the main archetypes. Once again, they're the three clowns, you know, the one who knows everything, the one who thinks they know everything, and the one that knows nothing. The young and dumb one, Peng, is young and dumb, does the kooky things with Everest the Yeti and shows off that young spirit. The middle one, Jin, is to be laughed at, overconfident and spit on by the world that originally held him as quite a high horse. And our protagonist, Yi, whose name kept making me think of that dumb dinosaur meme, is supposed to be the one with the most depth of them all. She's emotionally distant and she acts weird sometimes, and it's all because of the fact that she's grieving over her late father. I didn't get right away just when her father died. I sort of thought it was like years ago somehow, but it was quite recent, despite the movie not really telling you anything other than he's gone. His stuff is gone, her family doesn't mention it or seem to be grieving themselves, and you're supposed to get it from the picture in her violin case and seeing how old she is compared to him, which I didn't get because I'm stupider than a 4-year-old, I guess. Either way, it's another theme of death of a relative, and as someone who's seen it many times before, this version doesn't impress me. You know, she's distant about it all and doesn't want to talk about it. And then she learns she shouldn't be distant and can confide in her family instead. Also, the violin is his and it broke, until it didn't again. For the most part, it's just all not new at all. And as for the story itself, it seems very roughly put together in places. The premise is that these three kids try to get Everest the Yeti back to Mount Everest, avoiding the man who wants to own him and the zoologist who wants to capture it. And generally, each location they go to has a beautiful looking moment. They get found by the baddies, they escape with some random magic that seems to do something different every time it's addressed, and then they appear at the next location. And like, I have a good few problems with that as a whole. So first of all, the magic. This Yeti has some magical singing powers where whenever he hums, he glows a bluish glow, and from there he has the power to manipulate nature. This is about as close to a real explanation as you get. And the powers this gives the Yeti is the ability to make plants grow instantly, kinda standard magic stuff on that part, to causing blueberries to get larger to the point that they're explosive hazards, being able to command and control mini gusts of tornado winds to fast travel across lands, the ability to turn fields of flowers into a sea of liquid physics, the ability to make a dandelion gigantic, you know, like that one scene in one of the very first CGI animated movies ever, and the ability to fix a violin. Where's the natural element from that one? Regardless, when I was watching these kooky events unfold, I kind of just brushed them off to the side where I could, because they were just creative imaginary scenarios that kids would love to see play out, apart from the dandelion one, which isn't original at all. But even still, this magical power, to me, felt just a little bit too random at times, and was used far too much as a convenient deus ex machina to move the plot forwards in the most predictable and formulaic way possible. The concept is great for kids, but the delivery of it all felt unfinished and robotic. I'm telling you, a writing AI put all these pieces together or something. And speaking of just putting pieces together, the actual logistics of the adventure doesn't make any sense. The film begins in Shanghai and the protagonists jump onto a cargo boat to move to their next location. That's all fine. But from there, the ways of getting to places becomes more and more contrived, with flying dandelions taking them from a mountainous rock region to the middle of the desert, seemingly out of nowhere and without any real transition between the two. To the point that when the characters even get to Everest, you know, the big snowy mountainous region, they seem to not even notice until they're in the center of it, and don't recognize that they should be cold until like 15 minutes into the Everest sequence. Like magic, it's as if the characters seemingly teleport to each location in an attempt to push each spot into the narrative. And all to come to the reveal that Yeti the Everest, that is backwards. And all to come to the reveal that Everest the Yeti was intentionally taking the kids to all of Yi's dream locations across China after witnessing them all on a map that she made, which, while a nice wholesome twist on the narrative, doesn't make a lick of sense. A wild creature looking at a map briefly won't give them the knowledge of where each location accurately is, and even if they recognize the pictures, logically, they've never been there before because they're native to Mount Everest only. Plus, how did Yi not notice across this entire journey that these locations all happen to be her most desired locations? Not even a mention of something like, "I've always wanted to come here," was said at any point apart from after this reveal at the big statue. I guess Everest's one with nature magic is so strong that they can understand and find any spot of nature on Earth. Or at least in China, or something. Oh, but then there's the villains. Burnish is basically months from Up, and Dr. Zara is a cross between Honey Lemon and the babysitter from The Incredibles. Visually, we've seen them before. I don't know what it is with animation teams running out of character designs, but I feel there's a real epidemic going on somewhere in the industry. I mean, we've basically got 3 out of 6 of the Big Hero 6 crew now. But beyond just visuals, Burnish is literally months from Up. Both discover a mythical creature decades ago, both are still on the hunt for the incredibly rare creatures, and both are willing to do absolutely anything to get it. The only real twist is that this film tries to do that other film trope where the bad guy ends up becoming the good guy slowly over the plot of the film, becoming more passionate to the creatures around him. In this film, it's because he leaves behind his office building and heads into the natural world himself and becomes more passionate towards it as he traverses after the protagonists. All to keep in the theme of being one with nature more, you know how it is. Dialogue-wise, it felt a little forced, and I've seen this played out a million times before, but still, the character's still literally just a copy and paste job, but, you know, whatever, that's what it is these days, I guess. Honey Lemon Dr. Zara over here is the zoologist, which I discovered I was pronouncing wrong this whole time thanks to this movie. But yeah, while she at first seems like the passionate nature lover, over time she swaps roles, wanting to take the Yeti dead or alive because the plot demanded it. I genuinely forgot what her motivations were. Just know that she was always planning on backstabbing Burnish if things went sour. It's a simple twist that the villains swap who's bad, but it still doesn't impress me by any means. Beyond that, there's literally no substance to really talk about. Jin briefly gets caught by the baddies, only so that he can learn that the baddies are the real baddies for the sake of plot, and to then escape really easily on foot because the motorbike was there to be just a gag, and despite the team having militant vehicles, no one can find this guy running randomly and screaming through a forest. I don't know. Let me have a look at my notes here. Teleporting, did AI write this? Formulaic cinema, collaboration with China, good reviews, character, world, plot, wider context. I mean, I literally don't have any more points about this film. I'm grabbing at straws. Abominable is about as safe for a film as you can get, and the fact that it's for a family-friendly young audience means, for most people, that's okay. Many of the reviews say that they forgive this film for a lot of its less than perfect elements, and you know what? I don't. Kids are smart, and though this doesn't necessarily present itself in a condescending way, it also just seems like more consumable slush. It does nothing interesting, nothing groundbreaking, and it's just another project for another profit that feels pretty meaningless. It has all the same themes you've seen time and time again, and it does nothing in a new direction or in any way better. It's just more of the same put into a perfect square to be consumed for all without breaking away from its lanes to cause any conflicts. And this may be a real picky personal point, but I kinda don't like the theme of family solves everything. Sure, in this movie the family was pretty comforting and nice and they were helpful, and generally it's a good message to give to kids to express their emotions and rely on their parents, but at the same time, not everyone is given a loving family. Some people choose to be distant from their families for logistical, real problems, and maybe for some people, they need to learn to love the people who they choose to be their family, the people they surround themselves with, rather than the potentially toxic people waiting for them at home. I know this certainly isn't the place I'd find something like this, especially considering it's built with a Chinese audience in mind, but I'd love to see a movie that accurately hits on the themes of finding your own family, learning to express your emotions elsewhere, and becoming more independent of a person despite the hurdles and challenges that may be plaguing kids in their home life. If it could be a family-friendly animation that just happens to hit those harder themes, then all the better. But hey, maybe I'm just a fool for even bringing it up here of all places. At the end of the day, if you're 5, this film is alright. But if you've seen a film before, you've probably seen this film. The visuals are fantastic as they always are, but the content, the themes, the emotions, and the story beats all feel like factory defaults. Perfected by machine learning and spat out like another product to mindlessly consume. I'm surrounded by positive reviews of how nice this film is, talking about grieving and family, but I find it bland, unoutstanding, and flat with all of its points. It's forgivable for the audience it caters to, but I still find it to be a waste of a slot of cinema when something a lot more meaningful could have potentially taken its place, or at least been a bit more interesting with its premise. But hey, maybe that's just me. For now, my name's been Dazz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit. I genuinely came into this movie blind, so it's a shame I liked it so much less than everyone else. Oh well. I'll catch you on Friday. Until then, I'll be shouting at a cloud or something.